You know, I hadn't originally planned on making a video about this, but I think this conversation of sorts, telegraphic conversation more like these two were having, touches upon a couple of subjects that I have a few things to say about. Builds, difficulty, fun factor, and even player archetypes to some extent. So let's listen in for a bit.
I don't think the mechanics for the game are that great. It's not about like them being hard or not. So like there's two.
We're talking mechanics. I think he's going to be referring to the gameplay mechanics, which I find interesting because I feel like the gameplay, the combat of Diablo 4 is really tight. But let's see what he says.
Two spectrums, right? And I guess like so I'll try to explain it, and if I can't, then it is what it is. This is how I see games. Okay? I guess I'll just put it right here on like two spectrums, right? Is you've got hard.
It's gonna be casual
and
versus
then
hard.
Easy.
Okay.
And then you have unfun.
Okay.
And then fun. So these are two different lines.
Asmongold is doing the video game analysis version of Ceteris Paribus here. This is a term that economists use to indicate that they are only going to take into account some variables to analyze a problem, and that they are going to assume that the value of other variables is going to remain constant throughout the analysis. So he's taking difficulty and fun factor. We could make a matrix with these two variables, but there are several other things that we could take into account to evaluate whether a game is good or not. But because this particular discussion these two are having revolves mostly around gears and build and how they factor into difficulty and fun factor, we are also going to do the Ceteris Paribus thing, and we're going to limit our analysis to these two variables. Of course, it's important to say that indicators for these two variables change greatly from person to person. Let's take difficulty first. Does the game challenge your eye-thumb coordination? Does it require you to have tactical skills? Strategic skills, maybe? Does it require you to be observant? Some people consider Tainted Grail Conquest to be very extremely difficult. I think it's rather easy when compared to the best games in its class. When Phoenix Point came out, a lot of people were shitting on it, amongst other things, because of its extreme difficulty, which I frankly couldn't see anywhere. It was hard, yes, but not extremely hard. But some people breezed through the whole of Sekiro in 2 or 3 days, and that's probably the same time it took me to beat the last boss of the game, or this mofo. And of course the same thing goes for fun factor. Also do consider that there is some correlation between these two factors. They're not completely separate lines in every case. For Dark Souls Zealots, for example, the harder it gets, the more fun it becomes. And if you agree with this,
I got news for you. That means you're gay.
It means that challenge is a variable, but it's also an indicator of the fun factor variable. Then of course you have builds. And how do builds factor into these two variables?
Whenever I beat an Elden Ring boss, it's because I either have like very good build, which matters, sure, but like it's also because I probably figured out what to do and I dodged the attacks in the right way.
He's got to give an example from the ARPG genre because part of what I'm hearing here is I just don't like ARPGs.
I don't believe that.
Builds are one of the most important things in the RPG genre, and this is true of all subgenres. Be them isometric hack-and-slash ARPGs like Diablo, CRPGs like Baldur's Gate, or Souls-like games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne. For most people, builds factor in the fun factor aspect of the game because they provide players with tools which allow them to play the game their way. You could say that builds in RPGs encompass your choice of class, choice of talents/skills and/or perks, and the gear you equip on your character. But then, even the most consistent combinations of these things may be utterly useless in the wrong hands. If you are a guy who likes to outlast his enemies because you need time to make sound decisions because you tend to analyze every variable at all times, but you are really bad at making decisions quickly or under stress, then a glass cannon build is probably not for you. I think that the secret behind a successful build is to know thyself. Remember the Slayer Seeker Survivor DLC for Pillars of Eternity? Well, while that might have not been the best DLC ever, it represents brilliantly the 3 types of challenges that you have in RPGs. The Slayer challenges, for example, are all about ending the fight as soon as you can. Glass cannon builds tend to be efficient for these types of challenges. Survivor challenges are battles of attrition. These battles require you to use your resources wisely. Coming out all guns blazing in these fights will get you easy early victories, but such tactic will surely compromise your chances of winning the fight in the long run. So glass cannon builds will have a lot of difficulties with this type of fight, but builds that regenerate resources will feel right at home with these types of encounters. Secret challenges are all about figuring out the enemy's weakness. Baldur's Gate 3 has a ton of those, like the Coin Master, who has insta-kill attacks and a large health pool. The secret here is to kill the mort-looking skulls that accompany her, preferably before the fight even starts, and then try to keep as far away from her as you possibly can. But you don't know any of this beforehand, so you can either learn all of this during the fight, or you can go on about it the Savior Scummings way. These challenges are a little bit less about your characters and your party's build, and a little bit more about figuring out what you have to do. The takeaway here is that builds are a combination of your choice of class, plus your choice of talents or skills and or perks, and the gear that you equip on your characters. But whether a certain build is good or bad for your character also depends on the kind of player you are. If you feel like the game offers you the possibility to create and build your character in a way that is consistent with your approach to the game, then you're probably going to have fun with your build and with the game. Now let's talk about builds and difficulty, shall we?
Like an ARPG is a fundamentally loot-driven game. If you deprioritize loot to the point that you basically don't need loot to beat the game, like Elden Ring, Dark Souls, these are games where they have loot, but it's not the priority, right? The priority is the player's skill. That's like the #1 driving factor.
Whereas in Diablo 4, I feel like almost every solution to every problem is never get better at the game, it's just get better gear.
This is, I think, where things get spicy. I think that it is safe to say that both Dark Souls and Sekiro are in the difficult and fun tile of this matrix, at least by most people's appreciation if the scores of good old games in Steam are anything to go by. In Sekiro, for example, you have some prosthetics that you can enhance and some techniques that you can learn, and then there are a few items with which you can round up your build. The notion of build, however, in Sekiro is rather simple, and that's mainly because Sekiro isn't an RPG. Dark Souls, on the other hand, has classes, attributes, and several items that you can equip and enhance. Now, while some prosthetics and techniques might be more or less efficient in some situations, there's nothing in Sekiro that straight out allows you to brute force your way through its multiple challenges. This is a game that challenges your skill. Mastering the timing of attacks and parries, and split-second timing are the name of the game in Sekiro, and the game greatly rewards you for being good at these things. In Dark Souls, you can beat the game butt naked and using a ham sandwich as your primary weapon, but you need to be really, really good at the game if you want to complete it this way. But if you take the time to farm souls and items and levels, and if you enhance your gear to the fullest, you may not only make your character more efficient at what it does, but your build may even take you through many situations, even if you lack the level of skill that you are otherwise meant to have to play this title. But Sekiro and Dark Souls aren't hack-and-slash ARPGs that feature an isometric perspective like Diablo 4, which is the main game that's being discussed in Asmongold and Rhykker's video. Both of them are Souls games. One of them is an action game, and the other one is an RPG. And builds, most especially the gear component of the build, is meant to work differently in ARPGs.
He's got to give an example from the ARPG genre.
And that's why I'd like to use Shadows Awakening as an example, a grossly underrated ARPG that belongs in the exact same category as Diablo 4 or Path of Exile. But before we get into the explanation about how builds work in Shadows Awakening, and how they are different from games like Diablo 4 and Path of Exile, I'd like to introduce you to the concepts of efficacy and efficiency, and the difference between these two terms as they are understood in the realms of engineering. Efficacy is basically getting shit done. Efficiency, on the other hand, is getting shit done in the best possible way. And that means investing less time, using fewer tangible resources like consumables, or taking the least amount of damage depending on what you are concerned about the most. So in Shadows Awakening, having the best gear equipped on all your characters can make a significant difference. It allows you to make a few more mistakes before you figure out the right approach for your character during a boss battle. It buys you time to course correct and turn the tables in your favor, and it even can save your ass from time to time. But not even the best gear will get you all by itself through the game's challenges. A tactic that fails with bad gear is still a bad tactic with good gear. This means that in Shadow's Awakening, top tier gear makes the difference between an effective character and an efficient character. And this is how I think builds should work in RPGs. But it seems like that's not how Uber builds affect the game in Diablo 4. In truth, I have not played Diablo 4, but if what Asmongold says here is true...
Like, I think that Uber Lilith is an accomplishment to beat in Diablo 4. Yeah, it is. But the way that like 99% of people beat Uber Lilith isn't challenging, and it's not skillful. They play a broken build, they one-phase her in a second, they don't do any mechanics, and they just kill the boss, right? I could go in and beat the capstone dungeon. It would be easy. I would just have to change my build, get more health, and then go back and do it again. It's not hard to do. Like, and again, like, if I went and I did that, am I really beating the game? After I do all that, do I feel like a winner? No. So basically, PoE, there's two ways that you can beat a boss. You can beat a boss by getting better at the game, or you can beat a boss by getting better gear. In Diablo 4, I don't really think that's the case in a lot of regards, because there's so much unavoidable damage and things that you can't counterplay. So that's what the difference is.
So, okay, this is fair. I think ultimately what it comes down to is not a binary 1 or 2, on or off. It's a spectrum. Because even in the case of PoE, right, like there's some minimum level at which you can't beat the boss, right? At level 1, you literally can't. Unless I'm wrong, unless you can tell me a level 1 character literally can with enough time and skill. What I'm willing to guess is that PoE just balances it better with regards to how much you can or you need to lean on your build and your gear versus the skill, and maybe D4 goes a little bit too much towards deprioritizing skill and prioritizing gear and build.
The problem is that there are situations in which top-tier gear, rather than making the difference between an efficient character and an effective one, it's flat-out mandatory. There are situations in which, if you don't have top-tier gear, you have zero chance of beating the encounter. But on the other hand, if you have top-tier gear, you may or may not have top-tier skills and still be able to beat the encounter.
You can give anyone a Lamborghini, but someone's going to drive that car and win that race versus someone who has no experience. But ultimately, if you're not driving that Lamborghini, you are not winning that race. I don't care who you are. You're not winning that race with a Volkswagen.
And it seems to me like this design rewards the player for spending time playing the game, but not necessarily for getting good at it. At least this seems to be the case with endgame content, according to Asmongold. In competitive games like Street Fighter VI, you only get rewarded for getting better at the game. Spending time playing the game will get you nowhere all by itself. You have to learn from your time spent in the game. Now this
is the hard mode. It's dead. This is a 6-player one, where his health is increased.
Your absurd defiance ends here, hatchling.
He's dead.
They have the Uber Varshan. Hopefully we'll see.
Let's take a look at Uber Varshan.
So this is the Uber boss or whatever? Alright, let's see. Uber boss, new guy, here we go. Oh, he's tanky as fuck, holy shit. Never mind, dead.
seems to be the natural outcome of spending a shitload of time in the game, rather than the result of getting good at it. I don't know if someone who has spent 1/4 of the time playing the game would be able to obtain these same results within 3 or 4 attempts if he or she were given this same character, but if the answer is yes, then Diablo 4 is a game that grossly favors builds over skill, and I really wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if that were the case. I remember the time when I called it quits in Titan Quest, a game that I thoroughly enjoyed. When I saw that you could share loot between your characters, I checked out every class and decided that my third character was going to be a conqueror. So I diligently played through the 3 difficulty levels of the game with a conjurer first, and then did the same thing with a soothsayer. And throughout these playthroughs, I meticulously saved the gear that I knew was going to be useful for my conqueror. And when the time finally came to roll out the conqueror, it was so fucking boring. Because nothing posed the slightest threat to my character. It literally took no skill to progress through the game. I was one-shotting everything, bosses went down in a matter of seconds, and they required no tactics or talents whatsoever. And I could tell the difference because in my previous playthroughs, I had to use every trick in the book to beat some of these mofos. So the third time around, I was simply being rewarded for the time spent playing the game. So the game fell squarely into the tile of easy and not fun. Now, I know that endgame is a completely different beast in these games. In Grim Dawn, endgame takes the form of dungeons that you can only access if you've completed a long series of quests and acquired the skeleton key that's required to open them. You cannot teleport in and out of these dungeons as you can in the rest of the game. The only ways to exit them is to beat their final boss or dying. And here comes the problem that I have with endgame and some of these looter ARPGs. If you're slightly under-leveled, or more importantly, if you don't have the right gear, especially maxed out resistances, the amount of skill that you need to make up for this lack skyrockets absurdly. But if you have the right gear, then it becomes at best just another tough fight that you can beat with a little extra effort. This is a bit of a trademark of the ARPG subgenre, and it is also the problem that I tend to have with these games outside their campaign modes. But even though a good chunk of the people who play this variant of RPGs are okay with this design, quite a few of them seem to be shitting on Diablo 4 these days. Plus, Diablo 5 is already being announced? That's not a very good sign, is it? As for this little matrix here, I think it applies to all RPGs, and there is correlation between fun and difficulty, which is to say that these lines aren't completely independent. But I think this matrix is worth breaking into variables and indicators. But that is another story that I might be willing to tell at another time. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Share the video, come check us out on Discord, but most importantly, never stop gaming, but don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye everyone.